So in this part of the discussion, I'm going to give you a hands-on demonstration of a briefing note. Now, I'm using one example from the Australian context. So based on my experience of working with state government here in Australia, I'm using one of the blank templates that is used. Now, it's de-identified, so I'm not using any identified or something that is used before, just so that we maintain the copyright and all the other issues related to that. So you need to keep in mind that the briefing note is typically a confidential document. So at the top, it should be highlighted in bold and clear that it is a confidential document. So then you need to mention who is the intended audience or the target of this briefing note. And typically that would be top tier executives like the secretary or the minister. Then there should be a reference number, and that is subject to the documentation policy of the organization. Then there should be the title of the communication or the briefing note. What is the title? A clear and concise title. And then followed by that, a short preamble of the communication. So this is typically a couple of lines where you briefly outline the reason for which this briefing note is being prepared. Then in the next section, you need to underline the key information. And this is the section where you should write everything that the target reader should know even before reading the next section. So that is why the decision is sought, or any other reasons, for instance, a policy update or program update, a change, or a meeting or a stakeholder engagement, something like that. Then in the next section, it's good to give a bit of background and overview. So this is one on an evaluation project. So coming up with some action plan and some proposed steps. So you need to just think along the lines of like, how can you populate this information with some very brief, not too long overview about the specific context for which you're writing this briefing note. Next up is your implication. Now, the implication could be a financial implication, it could be organizational implication, it could be a strategic implication, but you need to highlight what are those key implications that needs to be highlighted here, and then what is the relevance of this with this briefing note. Then it's good to have some recommendation, because the target audience should know what is your proposed recommendation, because you're the subject matter expert. So the decision maker should actually know the possible avenues of the recommendation so that they can weigh between and among the alternatives. So not too many, maybe 2-3 recommendations from the reader, from the author's end, that who is the subject matter expert and will have more knowledge about this thing. Then the footer, as you can see, I have embedded some other aspects like endorsed by, approved by. So this is a good practice to have some other stakeholders as well, so that it shows that yes, you have had enough consultation before writing this briefing note. In the next steps, in next page, you need to highlight the next steps. So what are the next steps or the key action plan? Again, with specific milestones should be used here. Think about the SMART model and also the time frame by which these steps will be achieved. If there's any milestones, those milestones should also be used or mentioned here. Use bullet points. And then towards the end, this is a table where you should have the dates and the name of the author, the position of the author, consultations, who exactly you have consulted with. There could be multiple parties here. So again, this is really important that you have consulted this briefing note with multiple stakeholders, and that will show the reader that yes, this has been endorsed by many others within the system. And finally, some communication strategy, which will outline how this briefing will be communicated with the wider stakeholder or the other audience, whoever is involved into this process. So as you can see, this is like a practical demonstration of how to writing a briefing note. Now again, this is a very specific example, and depending on the organization and depending on the government space, there could be many different templates. So you need to use one that is relevant in your case. In terms of the structure of the briefing note, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. So briefing notes should be typically written in plain and simple English. Don't use complicated language. Always use short sentences rather than long sentences. Use active tense rather than passive tense. Avoid using some jargons or acronyms, but be very simple and articulate. So you should write a briefing note as if you were speaking with someone. So that means it should be very clear and concise, not too extended with lots of complicated sentence and structures. So I hope this gives you a clear understanding of how to prepare a briefing note. I've also attached an article which summarizes the various aspects that needs to be embedded into briefing note, key strategies to writing a briefing note, and some other aspects. So hopefully this will help you to learn how to write briefing notes.